For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Hello and welcome to the Gist on Strat News Global. Hi, I'm Surya Gangadharan. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson will be in Ahmedabad on Thursday, where he will interact with business leaders, we are told. And the following Friday, he will be in Delhi for talks with the political establishment. So, exactly what is on BoJo's agenda? Let's get a quick graphic in place first. He will review the talks on the India-UK FTA, the free trading arrangement that has been under negotiation for some time. He will also discuss investments in key sectors, including science and tech. The joint statement could also flag defense and military cooperation. So that is something would be interesting to look forward to. And also expect Boris Johnson to beat the Western drum on Ukraine. So that's something India will have to listen in. My guest this evening is Rahul Roy Chaudhary. He's appeared on our channel before. He heads South Asia Studies at the Institute for Strategic Studies in London, IISS. Welcome, Rahul. Long time since we've spoken.
Thank you, Surya.
Now, BoJo is here at a time when he's under pressure back home. In fact, there's some speculation that he could even lose his job. So, how do you see his chances?
Well, when Prime Minister Boris Johnson gets on his flight to Ahmedabad in the next few hours, later this evening in London, he will be heaving a sigh of relief, I think, a huge sigh of relief, for two reasons. Firstly, as you know, this is his third attempt to get to India. There were two earlier attempts. He was invited to be the chief guest in the Republic Day parade in January 2021. That did not work because of COVID. A subsequent visit in April 2021 was also cancelled due to COVID. So I think the fact that he's finally getting to India will be a huge sense of relief for him. Secondly, that before he gets on the flight, he'd have faced a very sort of tough Prime Minister's question time in Parliament in London, essentially on on his own sort of violation of the COVID regulations that he put in place during his birthday in June 2020. Now, this is serious because there is a lot of sort of anger at this, that he was seen to have attended a party for his birthday while other people, families, friends of people who are dying from COVID were not able to see their loved ones before they died, or even in hospital when they're critically ill. So this is serious. Boris Johnson has apologized to Parliament yesterday. He will apologize again later today. He has been fined by the police for this, but it's not it's not that serious for him to lose his job. And I say this for three reasons. Firstly, that he still has the support of a majority of the Conservative Party, a large majority in that sense. Secondly, that since these events took place and they were made public, is a war. There's Russia's aggression against Ukraine and the Russia-Ukraine war, on which Boris Johnson has taken a bold, statesman-like stand. And thirdly, the cost of living in the UK has really shot up. And the view is that, well, maybe there is no alternative to Boris Johnson in this respect. So I think that he will stay on. He will stick to his job as Prime Minister. And I think that because of circumstances, the challenges that he faced earlier have largely gone.
Mm-hmm. So let's get to the business part of his visit. The negotiations over FTA. What's the view from your end? What's your take?
So I think this has been tough negotiations from both sides. There have been three or four rounds, I think 4 rounds of talks between the Indian and the UK negotiators. It's been tough because India, as you know, hasn't till recently hasn't been in the business of signing free trade agreements with countries. The free trade agreement with the European Union, for example, has staggered for over a decade.
Yeah.
But my sense is that this time both India and the UK, for their own reasons, want a free trade agreement to be signed and to succeed. And the reason for this is that from the UK's perspective, a free trade agreement will really demonstrate the UK's post Brexit tilt to the Indo Pacific, where India is really one of two or three most important countries for the UK. To also to demonstrate the fact that with the UK leaving the European Union, it can strike its own trade deals. For India, the interest is that this will be the first trade deal that will be signed with the West. So again, an important sort of indicator and example to
Yeah.
others in the West who may want to sign it, including the EU. And also that there are clear sort of wins on the Indian side also on a trade agreement. So my initial view that actually the UK wanted the trade agreement more than India, I think is misplaced. Both wanted equally, but the timelines have been extended. When they started negotiations in January, the idea was that they would have an interim trade agreement for Boris Johnson to sign when he arrives in Delhi. My understanding is that this is not going to happen now, that there have been major breakthroughs. 65%, I think, of agreement in terms of trade is there. About a third of the total agreement in terms of services is there. But Boris Johnson is not likely to sign off on an interim trade agreement that the expectation was he would do. And of course, the final trade agreement will take several months in addition after an interim trade agreement is signed.
How much of this is driven by the fact that the UK is out of the EU, in a sense, bit of an outlier? India has always been an outlier, And how much is this? I mean, you've partly referred to it, but I'm just trying to get a broader sense.
So I think that it is it is largely driven by the UK coming out of the EU and Brexit. And remember, Boris Johnson was the lead figure which made the campaign so successful for the UK and for him in that sense. So for post Brexit UK that has the rhetoric of global Britain, a trade agreement with India, which will be in the next 8 years the third largest economy in the world, is tremendously important for the UK. So for India also, I think India, yes, was an outlier earlier, but remember, India has signed trade agreements recently with several countries,
Yeah.
free trade agreements with the United Arab Emirates, with Australia, with other countries. So I think the direction of travel, even for India, and the pace of travel for signing agreements has really changed in the last year or so. And that is why I am convinced that there will be a trade agreement between India and the UK, maybe not this year, but possibly, hopefully, by early next year.
Uh, Defense cooperation is being talked about now. Anything particular that BoJo may have in mind?
Boris Johnson, you know, is a controversial figure in the UK clearly because of him violating his own COVID regulations and the way he does business. But internationally, and I think in India, Boris Johnson will, cuts quite a dashing figure. I mean, in the sense that he sort of unkempt, appearance, disheveled look, but also a very sort of can-do attitude. Someone who's unconventional, someone who will basically get a good idea or hear a good idea and run with it. Someone who has actually publicly really talked about Modi as being a firecracker, as someone who's a political phenomenon. This is when Boris Johnson was in India in March 2019 as a private citizen. He
Yeah.
made these remarks. So my sense is that Boris, as an individual, as a persona, and the Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the personalities, actually there are similarities. I mean, both are popular figures in that sense. Both focus a lot on personal dynamics and relationships. So I think if it wasn't Boris going as Prime Minister, I would not think that a visit could be as successful as it is Boris going in as Britain's Prime Minister to India.
What about the defense aspect? What are you expecting?
So, Surya, the defense aspect, I mean, you are an expert on this. So the defense aspect, I think, to me, is really as important as the trade aspect. And the reason I say this is that defense traditionally between India and the UK has been underperforming. And from a time several decades ago, admittedly, when the UK was India's top sort of supplier of arms, today the UK has only 3% of the market share of India's defense. In India and the UK have had a strategic partnership since 2004. It's most recently been called a comprehensive strategic partnership since May last year, when during the virtual summit between Prime Ministers Modi and Boris Johnson. But in the entire period of the initial strategic partnership, no Indian defense minister of cabinet rank has traveled to the UK. So essentially, there has been a degree of mistrust on both sides in terms of defense. On the Indian side, the mistrust is political, that largely political in terms of in the UK's links with Pakistan traditionally, and also with China till recently. For the UK, the concern has been over India's links with Russia, and a view that technology exports to India could be sort of, could be channeled covertly to
Compromised.
Russia. So there has been mistrust in the defense relationship, but this is a unique opportunity for Boris Johnson to try to overcome that mistrust, and that is why I think this visit is particularly important given the Ukraine war, and that brings a new element to the India-UK defense relationship.
I'll just come to that in a bit. Anything specific you've come across in the media, perhaps in your interactions with people in the British government, about what is it that they would like to cooperate with India in terms of defense? I mean, Indo-Pacific, we know and we are aware of that. Is there anything specific, more specific?
So I think there are, the way that I've been looking at it from the public domain and from media reports is essentially there are three things really that are key. One is that it's defense and security. So in the security component, in the security sort of basket, cybersecurity is very important in this relationship between India and the UK. In fact, the UK was India's first trusted partner on cyber dialogues and cyber diplomacy, over a decade ago. So I would say cybersecurity, what what we'll read in the joint statement of cybersecurity is an important dimension. Another important dimension is counterterrorism. I think there have been some challenges to this in a bilateral manner, but multilaterally, India and the UK have actually worked together effectively in terms of the Financial Action Task Force on censoring Pakistan and going against China in the UN. So counterterrorism cooperation is important. In fact, recently, the Indian delegation leader for the counterterrorism talks was in London for the 15th round of talks. The third area of importance is the Western Indian Ocean and the sort of maritime security aspect, where both India and the UK have tremendous leverages, where the environment is challenging in the Western Indian Ocean, but both can do much more together as naval powers, as powers that have proximity in terms of reach, in naval terms, to the Gulf region, to the Eastern African coast. So that's the third area that is there. But I think the most important really will be on defense support to India. At the moment, there are some challenging legacy issues that need to be resolved in terms of UK British arms supplies to India and support to India. It was very encouraging that when the British Foreign Secretary Liz Truss was in India at the end of March, there was a sentence in the joint statement talking about the importance of resolving these legacy issues, because unless these legacy issues are resolved, the element of mistrust will continue. So I think there is a basket there already that can be looked upon, worked upon, also along with for example, a logistics support agreement, an MOU on logistics support in the Indian Ocean, building upon India-UK maritime cooperation, naval cooperation in the Indian Ocean. But the essential part now, following the Ukraine war, is going to be on technology transfers, and that's something that will be essential to the future and the ability to transform and build trust in the UK-India relationship.
Just a thought, Rahul. The British military has been shrinking for years, and so has manufacturing in Britain. I mean, even in terms of defense manufacture and design, is Britain still up there? Has it been overtaken by France already? I mean, I'm just asking a general.
Sure. So I think you're absolutely right, Surya. I mean, there have been tremendous changes in the UK defense industry over the last decade or so, and the UK military as well. But there are niche technologies that the UK has in cyber security, of course, I briefly mentioned, but also in terms of defense technology. And the focus really will be on accessing on for India's focus will be on accessing some of this new niche technology, including on autonomous weapon technology, including on supply of sort of force multipliers to India. So while the UK defense industry has also shifted in a way, as you correctly said, I think India's policies have also changed dramatically. So today, no one in the UK, no serious player in the UK, thinks that it is now going to be a simple a situation of transferring a military kit from the UK to India. Absolutely not. India has made it very clear that Atmanirbhar Bharat is key, self-reliance India on defense, Make in India is key. So really, the future will be in terms of accessing key UK niche defense technology for India, and this will have to be done through co-creation, co-development, co-manufacture in India, and hopefully at some stage, not only for the Indian Armed Forces to use once manufactured, with support of the UK in India, but also for export purposes. So I think both the situation in both countries has changed dramatically in terms of defense industry, but it really requires this focus on technology transfers requires, I think, a leap of faith
Yeah.
and a leap of trust on both sides, because I mean, one can understand that technology is essential, is key. There needs to be issues of intellectual property, sort of resolution in that respect, trust of supporting, of providing that technology. So these are complicated issues, these are challenging issues, but that is the way forward, and I think the UK understands it fully. It's not sort of looking at just selling bulk kit to India. That's not going to work. But UK defense companies today who are based in India, they can form 74% joint ventures. They can have with local companies. They can be considered as Indian defense companies for a whole set of competitive relationships and tenders to build. So that environment has changed. And I think one last point on this, I think India also sometimes uh, feels that the UK defense companies are an integral part of the British government, which there are strong links between American defense companies and the US government, French defense
Yeah.
companies and the French government. But in the UK, it is different. And, UK defense companies really owe their survival and the future to their shareholders, not to the government. So sometimes there is an exaggerated view in Delhi that the UK government can pick up the phone and tell a large UK defense company to deliver. That is not going to happen. So I think both countries, need to change the manner in which they will be looking at a win-win situation in terms of technology development and support.
Now let's get to that elephant in the room, Russia, Ukraine. What does Boris? What do you expect Boris to be wanting to tell Narendra Modi?
So, Boris is a very sort of a sophisticated politician, diplomat, especially when he's abroad in that sense. I mean, there have been some sort of misses in that respect in his travels pre-COVID, but essentially, he will come with a big picture. He's not interested in the technical details, the tactical issues. He's going to come with a big picture. And let me just sort of lay out very briefly what I think the big picture from his side is. Three aspects to this. Firstly, to be brutally honest, there has been a huge disappointment in the UK over India's stand in terms of the Ukraine conflict and its abstaining in the UN voting on Ukraine. And the reason of the disappointment, which has been made public by only two ministers, but there is huge disappointment within the UK establishment on this, has been on the expectation, and a high expectation, that India, as the largest democracy in the world, India as a country that sort of focuses on principles and sort of rule of law, or the rule of international order, etc., and rule of law, would really sort of condemn Russia's aggression against Ukraine. But on the Indian side, it's very very clear that India has principles. Of course, it does too, but it also has national interests. And I think the views are very different between the UK and India on this. So that's the first point, that there is undeniably huge disappointment in the UK based on the high expectation that the UK had in terms of what India would do in relation to Russia. The second point is that the UK really had a choice, and the choice was to come in strong, criticize India, and keep on sort of badgering India about its policy and a stand, and try to influence India to change it, which we know is not going to happen. We
Yeah.
know is not going to work. So the UK has actually adopted, I think, a very sort of engaging view, which is that there are difference of perspectives between India and the UK. But let's look at the bigger picture, the trade agreement that is there, but also look at how the UK, along with the G7 countries, can help India to diversify its source of arms from Russia, and in terms of supplies, etc., from the G7, including the UK. And that, I think, is a very important way ahead, an engagement ahead. And the third point, and the last one in this respect, is that this, I think, is what Boris Johnson will also play on. The idea we've just talked about co-development, co-creation, joint manufacturing. I mean, this is the implementation of the new engagement that the UK, I believe, is seeking with India. So, to come back to your question, I think that Boris Johnson will clearly note the difference, and the joint statement will note the difference between the two countries on Ukraine. But I think the actual operationalization of the relationship, the business agenda of the relationship, will not be affected by that. And we will, I hope, see a move forward in terms of the defense link engagement in this new area of of technology transfers with India. It's not going to be easy, but if Boris Johnson and Prime Minister Modi agree that this is the way forward, that political heft will actually help bring the officialdoms in both countries together to implement what the two prime ministers hopefully will seek to lay down.
There's also this issue of Khalistanis frequently popping their heads up in the UK. Then you have Pakistan itself, and there are many pro Pakistan MPs and others in the UK, who keep coming up with issues on Kashmir and so on. How does one get around this?
So I think essentially you're absolutely right. I mean, these are irritants in the UK-India relationship. Every time there's a discussion in Parliament on Kashmir, there's been an official sort of note from the very active Indian High Commissioner in the UK, countering this. Whenever there is a protest, sort of a demonstration by Sikh separatists, pro-Khalistani groups, especially against the High Commission, again, similar things happen. Now, I think the key is really that these developments are going to continue. I don't think these are going to be able to be stopped by the UK. But what is important is for the UK to show intent in engaging closely with the Indian government to try to ensure, for example, that if there is a demonstration by the Khalistani groups. It takes place in Trafalgar Square, which is
Yeah.
about 1.5 kilometers from the Indian High Commission at
Yeah.
Aldrich. That when there are discussions on Kashmir in Parliament, that no government minister takes part in those
Yeah.
discussions and doesn't add, and sort of exacerbate the difficulties in that sense.
Yeah.
Now, these also that if there are well-known Khalistani members who unfortunately work in within the British government, including the Ministry of Defence. I mean, I think that there should be an attempt to ensure that they have no sort of influence in any way within the government. So my point is that short of trying to end this, which is going to be very difficult for the UK to do, the India should work with the UK to encourage the direction of travel that I've just mentioned. And it would be good. I mean, if there's a discussion on Kashmir in Parliament, which usually is in a small room in Parliament, there may be 15 or 20 members of Parliament, mainly from the Labour Party. Well, so be it. I mean, no one, it doesn't make any impact. It has no influence at all. But if you have a British minister there, I mean, that's the difference. So I think these are changes that need to be done. These are decisions that need to be taken by the British government with obviously with the Indian government working alongside it. But I think there are things that can be done. There is engagement that still needs to take place on these irritants to lower the sort of nuisance value of the irritants in the bilateral relationship.
I mean, does it seem that India is hypersensitive, perhaps insecure?
So I've seen what has happened in the last few years with the Kashmiri and the Khalistani demonstrations jointly, outside the Indian High Commission at Aldrich, and it's been quite frightening. There have been also Indian nationals who've been trying to get into the High Commission. Windows have been broken. The crowd has got violent. I think that it is worrying, to be honest. I mean, it's not something that India is sort of, is just pushing across there diplomatically. It is worrying. I mean, if an Indian diplomat gets hit or, is assaulted, I mean, that would be a serious issue. So it's not, when Prime Minister Modi was in the UK the last time, for the Commonwealth Summit, Indian flag was burnt by,
Yeah.
that's serious. And now that's serious for India because that's a national offense for India to burn the national flag. But in the UK, as I found out subsequently, it's not a it's not an offense, which is seen as a criminal offense. Now, so India's sensitivity on this, I fully understand and appreciate. But how can you tell the UK that be as sensitive to
Yeah.
this on a flag which for the UK, even burning a Union Jack flag is not as
Par
sensitive.
for the course.
But so I think India also has to be sort of work with the UK in terms of its own sort of law and order, democratic sort of values, etc. But I do think there's a way ahead. I mean, these things, which are not really small. I mean, they have a great impact. Really will provide value added to the relationship, because what you're basically saying, both countries are saying, is let's work together, let's engage together to solve to sort of make these irritants less problematic for the larger and the more important diplomatic, political, defense relations between the two countries.
Rahul, great perspective. As always, a pleasure talking to you. Let's see how this trip goes. I'm pretty much sure that it will go off well. I'm sure everybody wants it that way. Thanks very much. And of course, we'll get back to you at some point, maybe further down when the PM visits England. There's some buzz about that also. Thanks
Okay.
very much, Rahul.
Thank you, Surya. Always great to discuss this with you. Always challenging questions, which I enjoy. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Rahul. Bye. And for all of you who've been following this conversation, thank you for your questions, comments, and observations. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel. Do subscribe to our website. Follow us on social media, Twitter. And thank you very much for tuning in. Good night.